Why Japan fought in World War II, ambition, resources, and the road to Pearl Harbor. In the years before 1941, Japan was caught in a spiral of intense nationalism, strategic ambition, and relentless pursuit of vital resources. While the attack on Pearl Harbor often serves as the face of Japan's entry into World War II, the roots stretch much deeper, tracing to decades of modernization, imperial expansion, and clashing interests with Western powers. After the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Japan shed its isolationist past and rapidly industrialized, aiming to match or surpass European empires. Successes like defeating Russia in 1905 and annexing Korea in 1910 boosted Japanese confidence, but also fueled a thirst for more territory, particularly in resource-rich parts of Asia. With China in disarray, Japan saw a chance to assert dominance, and by the 1930s, the empire expanded across Manchuria and beyond. Simultaneously, Western embargoes and cultural contempt stoked Japanese indignation, culminating in the fateful decision to strike first. Understanding why Japan chose war against the United States and the Allies requires unraveling the complex interplay of economic desperation, strategic gambles, and ideological fervor. Japan's imperial ambitions took a significant leap in 1931 with the invasion of Manchuria, setting up the puppet state of Manchukuo. At the time, the Great Depression battered global markets, and nations slapped protective tariffs on traded goods. Resource-poor Japan, reliant on imports for vital commodities like oil, iron, and rubber, faced skyrocketing costs. The Kwantung Army, already stationed in Manchuria, acted on its own initiative, engineering incidents to justify occupation. Politicians in Tokyo barely contained or even fully directed these military expansions, revealing a powerful militarist faction operating with minimal civilian oversight. Meanwhile, the League of Nations condemned Japan's move, prompting Tokyo to withdraw from the organization, a symbolic break from the international order. Many Japanese citizens saw these criticisms as hypocritical, given European colonial holdings worldwide, solidifying a sense that Japan had to assert itself or be relegated to second-class status in global politics. By 1937, full-scale war with China erupted following the Marco Polo Bridge incident. This conflict quickly drained Japan's manpower and resources, yet the imperial leadership believed that conquering vast Chinese territories would eventually pay off in raw materials. Offensive campaigns steadily advanced but never fully subdued China, which resisted fiercely. Western nations, particularly the United States, started to view Japan as a rogue aggressor. Through 1938-1939, Washington implemented partial embargoes on aviation fuel and metals, signaling disapproval. Then came the Tripartite Pact in 1940, aligning Japan with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. For Japan's policymakers, partnership with these Axis powers promised mutual strategic advantage, but it also deepened the rift with the Allies. Meanwhile, the necessity of oil remained paramount. Most of it came from the US and the Dutch East Indies, supplies Japan desperately needed to keep its navy and industry alive. The turning point came in mid-1941, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze Japanese assets in the United States and imposed a complete oil embargo. Overnight, Tokyo confronted a dire crisis. Its stockpiles might last a year, possibly two if they rationed strictly. War planners believed that without a fresh supply of petroleum, Japan's modern military would collapse. Yet, ceding territory in China to appease Western demands appeared unthinkable to hardline militarists. The vision of a Greater East Asia County Prosperity Sphere, championed by leaders like Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, aimed to unify Asian nations under Japan's leadership, but effectively meant occupying them for resources. In this mindset, seizing oil fields in the Dutch East Indies became a life-saving strategy, and crippling the US Pacific Fleet preemptively felt necessary to ensure success before the Americans could mobilize. Discussions with Washington meandered aimlessly, each side unwilling to yield its core demands, leaving a precarious stalemate. Japanese strategists concluded that waiting longer would only tighten the noose. Ideology played an equally potent role. Japan's ruling circles infused Bushido ideals, loyalty, sacrifice, and disdain for surrender, into national policy. Propaganda emphasized the emperor as a living deity and cast Western powers as bullies restricting Asia's rightful ascent. Citizens were told their island nation faced strangulation by hostile foreigners, fueling a siege mentality that rationalized war as self-defense. Traditional samurai ethos merged with modern militarism, producing a culture that revered audacious strikes and scorned prolonged negotiations. For many officers, the Pearl Harbor plan fit perfectly with the belief that a decisive initial blow could force the US to negotiate, giving Japan breathing room to conquer Southeast Asia. It was a high-stakes gamble. If the Americans remained resolute, Japan might face an unwinnable conflict. On December 7, 1941, coinciding with December 8 Tokyo time, Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Within hours, Japanese forces also swept into the Philippines, Hong Kong, and Malaya, seeking a lightning advantage across multiple fronts. Publicly, officials framed this as liberating Asia from Western colonialism. Privately, it was about ensuring Japan's survival through swift resource grabs and incapacitating the US Navy. At first, the strategy seemed triumphant. Battleships lay wrecked at Pearl Harbor, and Allied garrisons reeled in places like Singapore. Yet, the Americans' carriers were spared, and within months, engagements like Midway proved how severely Japan had misjudged the foe's resilience and industrial might. The war ballooned into a total conflict Japan could hardly sustain. In hindsight, many Japanese historians reflect on the critical miscalculations. Leaders underestimated the United States' ability to mobilize its vast economy, produce warships at an astounding rate, and coordinate a global strategy. They also overlooked the value of diplomatic alternatives. Some moderate voices within Japan's government cautioned against war, recognizing the gamble. But the momentum of militaristic fervor, combined with immediate resource pressures, drowned out their pleas. Diplomacy stalled, and once the choice for war was made, Japan found itself locked in a brutal struggle on multiple fronts. What started as a plan for rapid conquest of Southeast Asia escalated into a quagmire in China and the Pacific battleground where the US submarines strangled Japanese shipping. Public morale, initially boosted by Pearl Harbor's success, eroded under relentless Allied bombing of the home islands and the relentless wave of defeats after 1942. Even the famed Bushido ethos that spurred early aggressions brought catastrophic consequences in the war's final stages. Kamikaze missions and instructions for civilians to die rather than surrender turned Japan into a tragic theater of desperation. Ultimately, atomic bombs and Soviet intervention forced Emperor Hirohito to announce a surrender that shocked a population indoctrinated to fight to the last. Only then did the empire's leadership fully realize that no matter the will to battle, Japan couldn't outlast the Allies' overwhelming industrial edge. Looking back, historians identify multiple root causes of this disastrous conflict: the urgent scramble for resources, ideological indoctrination, frustration with Western racism, fear of encirclement, and sheer overconfidence in Japan's initial advantage. Yet to this day, the question, why did Japan fight in World War II, sparks debate, particularly regarding how the government balanced economic necessity against moral considerations. Some argue Japan's leadership felt cornered by US sanctions, leaving war as a final resort. Others see it as a natural culmination of decades of imperial expansion and militarist policymaking, with economics serving as a convenient catalyst rather than the sole driver. In any case, the tragedy of Japan's war underscores that even a rapidly industrialized, modern state can stumble into ruin when convinced that short-term might and national pride outweigh the risks of a global confrontation. Millions died across Asia in the resulting clash, including Japanese civilians engulfed by Allied firebombings and atomic devastation. Ultimately, Japan's choice to wage war against the West, culminating in the Pearl Harbor strike, illustrates how nationalism, resource scarcity, and flawed strategic calculations can converge into a cataclysmic decision. The subsequent defeat and occupation reconfigured Japan's politics and economy for generations, positioning it as a pacifist power allied with the US. The war's legacy persists in diplomatic friction, as neighbors recall Tokyo's brutal occupations and question whether Japan has fully confronted its past aggressions. In understanding why Japan fought in World War II, we learn lessons about the dire consequences of militaristic ambition, the perils of strategic misjudgment, and the destructive power of letting national pride overshadow rational compromise. Subscribe to Legends of the Battlefield for more stories of brilliant tactics and legendary leaders.